Hello, everyone. This is almost a family affair. I guess Spain is more relevant for tourism than for fintech. Okay, my name is Arturo González. I'm the CEO of Eurobit Technologies. We were the first account information service provider and payment initiation service provider in Europe, founded in 2003. So we've been operating for more than 15 years in the European market. What that means is that innovation can take place in Spain, beyond other things. And I'm also a board member of the Spanish Fintech Association, which is the reason that I'm doing this presentation. But before I start, I have to warn you that this is the first time I go through this presentation. So the flow is not going to be perfect, and since we're this is a family affair, interrupt me whenever you consider it appropriate, okay? So the Spanish Fintech and Insurtech Association was founded in 2016, so we're about 3 years old. These are the board members. So basically the structure of this association is that we have 6 board members, we have a secretary, and we have a full-time employee that's running the association. And currently that is enough for our purposes, in case it serves as a benchmark for other countries. So the main objective of the association is to create the right environment for innovation in the fintech space to take place and to align with the regulator and with the market needs. And to do so, we have created a number of verticals, because fintech is a very wide term that caters for many different solution types that have different needs, different regulation timings, or in some cases might not even be regulated. So each of the verticals has is led by a specialized company that is part of that vertical. So the main values of the association were transparency, collaboration, communication, and research. So basically, everything required to make fintech innovation a reality in the market and aligned with the needs of society. Okay. So we're currently 126 members, which I think it's a very significant number, and we're growing. My understanding is that there are around 350 identified fintech companies in Spain. So that means that basically almost half of them are members of the association. But bear in mind that probably many of them are one-man shows in the early stages, and even though the joining fee is relative to size and is not very high, in some cases, well, it can be a burden for one-man shows that are starting. We have 28 international alliances. I'll speak about the most relevant ones later. And in terms of the verticals, we have already 12 verticals in place, although this will be changing because the market is changing, okay? So in terms of the verticals, the first one is wealth tech, which is all the companies that have technology solutions for managing wealth solutions. So it might be portfolio management. For instance, Finect is a social network for investors. It would be one of the members, but any solution that manages portfolios, stocks, bonds, or any other type of investment product or service would fit into this vertical. Then we have personal finances. This would be typically the vertical for personal financial managers and solutions oriented to help individuals or companies manage their finances. So not only personal financial managers, but also business financial managers and treasury applications and the likes. Then we have alternative financing, which would be all the lenders that are outside of the banking space, so operating typically in a non-regulated environment. We would have also crowdfunding and crowd lending, which would be the companies that either get funds from lenders or give it to loaners. Many of them around specific assets. For instance, in the real estate space, we have a number of companies playing in that space. Then we would have transactional services and currencies. So these would be companies like, for instance, TransferWise, although it's not a member, it's not a Spanish company, but just so you have an idea of what sort of company we're talking about. Then we have the payments vertical, all companies that specialize in payment solutions. So it would either credit card payment solutions, payment initiation company like so forth, if it were Spanish would be here, or all the companies specializing in SEPA direct debits are part of this vertical. Then we have financial infrastructure, which is the vertical to which we belong. Actually, until today, I was the vocal of this vertical, but I no longer have time, so I have delegated in someone else. Basically, these are the companies providing technology to other companies that have the end users as their customers. So basically, this would be B2B or B2B2C fintech companies. Most of them are in the open banking, as in our case, open banking PSD2 space, but there are some that are playing in different spaces. Then we would have all the cryptocurrencies and blockchain companies. This is self-explaining. We have all the insurtech, so companies providing solutions around insurance. These would probably grow into further verticals because this is like just having one vertical in banking, so the different needs and solutions in the insurance industry are all varied. So currently we don't have critical mass to separate it in different verticals, but this will happen sometime down the road. Then we have all the client onboarding or KYC related companies, so companies that have solutions to digitally onboard customers, to do proof of life and all this sort of stuff, basically to identify a client digitally. Then we have the neo and challenger banks. This again is self-explaining, so number 26 would be, and actually is, in this vertical because they have the Spanish branch. And then marketplaces, so basically companies that sell stuff from other providers in a common space, or obviously stuff that is related to finance. So these would be the verticals. I don't know about your experience in other countries, if this sort of division is the same in other countries, or if you find anything that's novel or anchored, please do tell me. Then what were our goals and what have we achieved since we started? So basically we wanted to be representative of the sector. We wanted to have an impact on employment, so create good quality employment within the fintech sector. We also wanted to have an impact on gender. Mind you, my personal opinion is that women don't need any help, but it's good to align ourselves with a core values that are being driven across the Western world. We also wanted to have a fluid and smooth dialogue with the supervisors and the regulators. I think this is critical. Many years ago, this was probably the biggest shortcoming of the fintech industry, but fortunately we have managed to have a very good alignment. Then to internalize the association in terms of establishing relationships with other geographies and to have some positive influence in them in both directions. And lastly, to have a regulation that was correct in the sector or in the parts of the sector that are relevant, because as I said, not all fintech services are subject to regulation. So in terms of representativeness, and forgive me for the initial question mark, in Spanish we use a beginning question mark. So I think we have clearly achieved this goal. So we are seen as the leaders and trendsetters in terms of fintech awareness. We are constantly called by the regulators and the supervisors to check our opinion, to condition to a reasonable extent the lawmaking process, and we have continuous contact with the press. So we are a relevant actor in the fintech space. Sometimes even at the same level as the banking industry. So when there's a potentially conflicting issue, the newspapers would check the EXAs, the banking, the 3 different banking associations in Spain, as well as the Spanish Fintech Association at the same level, and would have the same relevance in the press. So in terms of growing, so this was the first fintech map that we released in 2016. That's the fintech map today. So there's a significant growth in this time space. That doesn't mean that it's all thanks to the Fintech Association. So the main driver on this increase in fintech companies are the entrepreneurs themselves. But I guess that what we have done in these 3 years have favored the growth of the ecosystem and creating a positive landscape or a breeding space for new companies. And the same with the InsurTech space. So the growth has probably been in relative terms bigger, because it's a relatively newer movement, and the growth has been quite spectacular. So in terms of employment, I'm not sure there are really actual validated figures, but you see it, and those are press clips. So one of them, it seems that in Spain we have the largest number of biggest ratio of fintechs to inhabitants in Europe, which I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's a fact, and a big number of qualified jobs are being created each year. And there are a number of players that we don't have a unicorn yet, but we have some companies that are leading their respective movements in Europe. For instance, Fintonic would be one. It's almost certainly the largest PFM service provider in Europe, with around 600,000 active customers. And in terms of open banking, it probably does not sound good that I say it, but we're probably the leaders in terms of customer references and usage. We're currently processing 3 times the volume of open banking UK combined. This probably has to do with the fact that this started in Spain earlier than in other countries. But okay. So in terms of impact on gender, well, the real impact, the proof is in the pudding. But we've done several events related to women and fintech to try to attract women to fintech, which, as I said, women don't need any special help, but to create awareness and interest, I think it's very good and positive. So in terms of dialogue with regulators and supervisors, our main stakeholder here are the Spanish Treasury. The CNMB is the regulator of the markets, share markets, and Banco de España would be the supervisor for all financial activity. So we have a very active engagement with all three of them. In the case of payments and infrastructure, we have a very active role with the Treasury, which consults us on a regular basis regarding to PSD2 and all other regulatory development, and the same with the supervisor. Unfortunately, most supervisors in Europe are very scarce on resources, but in case of Banco de España, they do it as better as they can. Actually, we had a meeting yesterday with them, with all the companies that either have a license or are in the process of obtaining a PSD2 license, because as you probably may be aware, we've already started the transition to full compliance with PSD2, which will happen if there are no delays in September 14th. And you may be aware that there's an issue regarding APIs getting an exemption and the potential impact if the exempted APIs are not of good quality on the existing business. So that was the reason of the meeting we had yesterday. In terms of internationalization, again, sorry for the typo there, we have very strong bonds with Latin America. That's natural. Well, we'll see later that, and also we're establishing very strong bonds with other European fintech associations. So we think there should be a unified voice of European fintech in Brussels to make sure that common interests are achieved. And in terms of the initial one, with Latin American countries, we've already performed or have carried out 2 different summits. So there are most, if not all, Latin American fintech associations are part of this Latin America, and we have a term in Spanish, which is Iberoamerica, which is Latin America and Spain. So we've created a multi-country association that has common interests, and so we have created a code of good practices. We've structured how a sandbox, a regulatory sandbox, should look like, and we've already released a white paper on equity crowdfunding. And in terms of Europe, we are trying to create this pan-European fintech association. We're finding some issues because, for instance, there's nothing equivalent in the UK. There's no UK fintech association. There's no Germany fintech association. So we have 2 of the largest countries in the EU that have no representativeness. So that makes it a bit trickier. Because then you have France that say, well, if Germany and the UK are not, what are we doing here? So we're starting we're trying to build it from the bottom up. And we've already have partnerships with Italy, Portugal, Poland, Holland, and Belgium. And if any of you are representing associations from other countries, you're more than welcome to start a conversation. Oops. Then in terms of regulation, we've already released 4 different white papers. I think this is a very good practice. It creates a lot of awareness and conditions quite a lot the regulators. As an aside, I am surprised by the receptiveness of European authorities in regards to minorities, and in the financial space, fintechs would be a minority, although there's a trend. And I can speak about this first person. So when we've had issues with PSD2, the kind of attention that we've grabbed from European authorities at the maximum level is incredible. So just to give you some examples, we published, I don't know if you are aware of it, we published, not as the Spanish Fintech Association, as a third-party provider association in Europe, we published an open letter regarding the future of European fintech if PSD2 was not done right. And as a consequence of publishing that, we've already had 3 different meetings with Valdis Dombrovskis, which is the VP of the European Commission. So that means there's a certain interest on these happening, not only in the open banking space, but in all the different spaces. And I think we've been a key driver on having the Spanish regulatory sandbox created. It's already a reality. It was published a few weeks ago. So, and this is expected to create or to enable the creation of more than 4,000 high-quality employees and to attract more than 500 million euros in investment, which is something relevant. I think down the road it will be much more. And this would not have been possible without the drive from an association that is seen as the regulator, as representative of the industry. There's no way you can achieve these things, even if you have big players pushing, you need representativeness. So probably the best combination is to have a couple of big players which have the muscle and the time and the resources to spend hours in meeting with the regulators, but you need to be backed by a significant number of smaller players. Otherwise, it's just defending the interest of the few, which authorities or regulators are not so sensitive to. Okay, I think this was it in terms of the presentation. So open to any questions, any comments you want to make. Well, the main objective now is try to create a pan-European fintech association, probably with offices in Belgium. So in order to have a pulse on what's going on, because believe me, Brussels feeds 50,000 public employees, and the amount of work and stuff that they can get out the door is incredible. So keeping up with things happening it requires a massive effort, and I think there's a lot to be gained. There's a lot to be gained by uniting forces and having a single body, being aware of everything that's going on, trying to condition what goes on, and what happens out of our proactivity, try to condition in favor of the industry. That's the main goal, but that doesn't mean that other goals are not achievable. So share best practices and ideas, etc. I think it's always welcome. What country are you from? Okay, so I'm just guessing, but I guess that you probably would not have interest in direct engagement with Brussels, because your affection by the European regulation would be indirect, by inspiration, let's say. I guess many of the laws that happen in Europe are in some way replicated in Turkey and other geographies. But I'm sure there's a potential for collaboration. We'll exchange cards and put you in contact with Rodrigo, who is the person in charge of establishing these contacts. Any other comments? Yeah. In terms of size? Well, I would say that lending is probably the biggest area. There's I'm not lending as micro lending and consumer lending. I'm unsure of the short-term future of many of those companies. And no, that would be in the crowdfunding space. So that would be non-banks doing consumer finance. That's probably the most crowded space at the moment. And the problem I see with that space is that normally these companies have some risk models that are created by themselves and that have not gone through a full economic cycle. So I don't know what will happen when we reach the end of the cycle, which, by the way, I think is quite near. I don't know if it's a matter of months or 1 year, but wouldn't guess that it's much further away. So let's see if the scoring and the risk management models that they have will be able to survive the most stressful part of the cycle, which is going to have sometime soon. So, sorry? Yes, it's one of the most attractive parts in the finance sector today is consumer lending, because it's the only place where you can have larger spreads, because interest rates are very low, and for typically people asking for these kind of loans are people that have been rejected by the banks, or that have a very strong urgent need to get financing. So I'm not an expert in the area, but my understanding is that some of these companies make a profit also from defaults. I don't know how it works out, but I understand that having a number of defaults increases their profit. Not third-party providers. Well, depends. It depends how you look at it, and I'm going to speak. Yeah. Okay. I was going to answer in first person. So we are mostly a technical TPP. So if I answer in first person, you'll probably understand better. So we are mostly a technical TPP. So our customers would typically be BBVA, Santander, etc. So companies that would already be licensed, but we are requesting a license. Well, we have an AIS license since February 5th, and we requested it for two reasons. One is marketing. So it looks good to say we have a license. That means that our technology and our operations meet the criteria to be licensed, but also to cater for these type of companies. Many of them are very small, or have an issue with obtaining a license. So we let's say we lend the lenders our license to obtain banking information in order to include it in their in their credit scoring process. In Spain, at the moment, just one, ours. But you have to take in mind that Spain was one of the companies that was late in transposition. So transposition was only achieved by the end of November. And we have a license thanks to the fact that we invest quite a lot of our time in speaking with the regulators and the authorities. And we found out that there's a loophole in the sense that it's something that's called the direct effect principle, which means that a company or an individual cannot be penalized for their government not being diligent in transposing laws. This is a principle that dates back to 1963. So we applied to that principle and said, you are causing us prejudice for not transposing, and we applied in July last year. So that helped us in being earlier to the market than our competitors or customers. But I think there are at least 30 companies applying for a license. What geography are you from? Poland, okay, interesting. I think there's some similarity between Poland and Turkey in terms of access to bank information. In the sense, I learned this today. I knew Poland. I didn't know Turkey until this morning. In Poland, there's a specific banking regulation that forbade banks to access other banks' information through screen scraping. All this will change with the entry into force of PSD2. But in Turkey, there's a similar law that says, it's not a law, it's a banking regulation that says that banks are not cannot provide information to other parties, and they have to do their best to avoid that information flowing to other parties. So there's a similarity there. Any more questions, comments? Okay, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to give you my cards in case you want to ask anything offline.